Bringing my fiancée's laptop in for servicing seemed routine at first, but the moment the technician shut the door, lowered his voice and said, "Call off the wedding and change your locks immediately," my heart skipped. Stunned, I asked him what on earth he meant. Without another word, he pulled up a concealed folder. The images inside drained the warmth from my veins. "If you're here with me, stay until the end of this story, and drop the name of the city you're watching from so I can see just how far this has traveled." I never imagined that something as ordinary as fixing a computer would unravel my entire world. That morning had begun like any typical Tuesday in our peaceful Denver neighborhood. Claire had rushed out early for her marketing job, brushing a quick kiss against my cheek while mentioning a big client presentation under her breath. Her silver Dell laptop rested on the kitchen counter, its screen blinking with that irritating blue glow that always signaled trouble. "It keeps blacking out," she'd complained the night before, the strain clear in her tone. "I can't risk losing my project files right now." I offered to swing by TechFix, the small downtown shop that had rescued me from tech disasters more than once. Claire paused, lightly tapping her fingers on the granite surface, then forced a smile and passed me the charger. "You're a lifesaver, Patrick. Just tell them not to dig into my personal stuff, okay?" It sounded fair enough. Everyone has files they'd rather keep private. I assured her I'd make it clear to the technician, and thought nothing more of it. TechFix sat wedged between a cozy cafe and a dry cleaner, its narrow storefront easy to miss if you weren't looking for it. As I stepped inside with Claire's laptop tucked in my scuffed leather messenger bag, the sharp scent of circuitry and metal cleaner filled the air. Fluorescent bulbs buzzed overhead, throwing stark light over rows of dismantled desktops and coils of tangled wires. Behind the counter stood Dave Rodriguez, the owner. Over the years we'd built an easy familiarity. Around 55 with streaks of gray in his hair and the calm patience of someone who'd spent decades untangling other people's digital disasters, Dave gave me a nod as I approached. "Patrick, what brings you in today?" I placed the laptop gently on the counter. "Claire's computer keeps shutting off randomly." Dave gave a small nod, flipped it open, and pressed the power button. The Dell logo flashed onto the screen, shimmered for a second. Then everything went dark. He tried again. Same result. "Looks like a loose display cable," he said calmly. "Nothing major. Should be an easy repair. Give me about 2 hours." "Sounds good. I'll grab some lunch and swing back." I slid my business card across the counter, my cell number printed neatly beneath my name, and headed out. Outside, the autumn air felt sharp and clean, tinged with the faint smell of burning leaves drifting through the neighborhood. I used the time to check off a few errands, completely oblivious to the fact that my world was quietly shifting beneath my feet. When I stepped back into TechFix at 2:30, the atmosphere felt off. The bell above the door chimed as usual, but Dave didn't greet me with his normal easy smile. Instead, his face looked tense, almost disturbed. "Patrick, we need to talk." A knot formed instantly in my stomach. "Is it totaled? Can't it be fixed?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced around the shop to confirm we were alone, then walked to the front entrance and slid the deadbolt into place. The sharp click echoed louder than it should have. "The hardware problem was minor," he began carefully. "Loose display cable, just like I figured. But while I was running system checks to make sure everything else was stable, I came across something." He motioned for me to follow him to his workstation in the back. Claire's laptop sat open on the desk, the screen now perfectly stable, but what filled it made the warmth drain from my body. "I run diagnostic software on every device that comes in," Dave said quietly. "Sometimes it uncovers deleted files, damaged data, normal stuff. Usually it's harmless, work spreadsheets, old family pictures." He turned the monitor slightly toward me. "But this." On the screen was a folder titled P Documentation. Inside were dozens of files, names like bank statements, July, personal calls, transcribed, daily routine notes, and there were many more. My fingers started trembling. "What is this?" Without saying much, Dave opened one of the image files. The screen revealed a photo of me asleep in my own bed, clearly taken from the bedroom doorway. The timestamp showed it had been captured just last week. "There's more," he said softly. He pulled up additional pictures, shots of paperwork from my home office, copies of bank statements, insurance documents, even printed emails between my lawyer and me about estate planning. Someone had been inside my house, carefully photographing my most personal records while I wasn't there, and that someone clearly had access. Dave, I don't get it. Why would Claire need any of this? He didn't answer directly. Instead, he opened another image. It showed my father's worn leather portfolio, the one I kept locked inside my desk drawer. Inside that case were the inheritance documents I'd received after he passed away 17 years ago. Property deeds, investment portfolios, and the trust fund details he had set up for me. I dropped into the chair beside Dave's desk, my thoughts spiraling. Someone's been in my house, digging through my private belongings. Not just someone, Dave said carefully. The metadata on these files shows every single photo was taken using the built-in camera on this laptop, Claire's laptop. The realization struck like a punch to the chest. The woman I was about to marry, the one I trusted completely, had been quietly cataloging pieces of my life behind my back. But why? I whispered. There's more, Dave added, his voice tightening. Audio recordings. He opened another folder labeled Conversations. Inside were dozens of sound files, each marked with specific dates and times. He clicked one recorded 3 days earlier and pressed play. My own voice filled the small shop. The trust fund matures next year. It'll be worth close to $400,000 by then, and the house keeps increasing in value every year. Then Claire's voice followed, warm and affectionate. That's amazing, babe. Your dad really set you up well. It had been an ordinary dinner conversation, just me opening up to the woman I was about to marry. At the time, it felt like trust. Now, hearing it replayed in this setting, it sounded like carefully collected evidence for something I couldn't yet see. She's been recording you, Dave said quietly. Private discussions, details about your money, your family, your daily habits. Patrick, this isn't how healthy relationships work. This is calculated monitoring. I kept staring at the screen, struggling to absorb it all. In 6 months, I was supposed to stand at the altar with this woman. I shared my home, my bed, and my future plans with her. And all along she had been documenting me like a case file. Why are you showing me this? I asked, my voice thin and unsteady. Dave slowly shut the laptop and met my eyes. Because I've come across this pattern before. He leaned back slightly. About 3 years ago, a woman brought in her boyfriend's computer. Same structure, same organized folders. It turned out she was working as a private investigator. His ex-wife had hired her to collect evidence for a custody dispute. The air in the shop suddenly felt suffocating. I tugged at my tie, trying to breathe evenly. You think Claire's investigating me? I think it's possible someone hired her, Dave replied carefully. The real question is, who would want information on you, and for what reason? My thoughts scrambled through the last few months. Claire asked detailed questions about my family background, her unusual curiosity about my investments, the way she'd sometimes sit quietly while I was on the phone, eyes on the TV but attention clearly elsewhere. At the time, I'd mistaken it for interest. What am I supposed to do now? Dave reached into a drawer and handed me a small flash drive. I copied everything before I called you. Don't confront her yet. Act like you haven't seen a thing. Keep acting like nothing's wrong until you understand what this really is, Dave advised. I slipped the flash drive into my pocket, though my fingers were still unsteady. And the laptop? I'll say the repair needed extra time, he replied. That should buy you space to think. After unlocking the door, Dave rested a firm hand on my shoulder. Patrick, stay alert. When someone puts this much effort into collecting information, it's rarely for harmless reasons. I stepped out of TechFix into the fading afternoon light, but the world no longer felt the same. The streets I'd driven 1,000 times suddenly seemed unfamiliar, almost hostile. I had walked into that shop worried about a malfunctioning screen. I walked out questioning my entire life. The drive home dragged on endlessly. Every stoplight felt like an interrogation, giving me too much time to replay memories and doubt everything I believed about Claire. How long had she been doing this? What was her endgame? And who, if anyone, was behind it? When I finally pulled into my driveway, I didn't get out right away. I sat there, staring at the house I'd lived in for 8 years. The white colonial with blue shutters, and its neatly trimmed garden, had always symbolized comfort and permanence. Now it felt artificial, like a carefully built set, where I'd been unknowingly performing for invisible observers. I climbed the porch steps slowly, my keys clinking against the old military-style keychain my father had given me years earlier. As I unlocked the door, a thought crossed my mind. Was Claire already inside, ready with questions about her computer? But the house greeted me with silence. Just the soft creak of wood settling, and the steady hum of the refrigerator filled the space. I moved from room to room, places I knew by heart, yet everything looked different now, as if I were seeing my own home through the eyes of a stranger. Had she taken pictures in the living room as well? Gone through my dresser drawers, searched my closet, opened the medicine cabinet in our bathroom? The sense of intrusion was overwhelming. This wasn't only betrayal, it was a calculated invasion of my privacy, layer by layer, for motives I couldn't even grasp. I headed upstairs to my home office, the hardwood steps creaking in that same rhythm I'd known for years. Inside the desk drawer, my father's old leather portfolio rested exactly where I had left it. I unlocked it, lifted it out, and opened it carefully, brushing my fingertips across the documents. Those papers symbolized his lifetime of work, the foundation he'd left behind so I could build something solid and secure. Now that very information was being weaponized against me, and the woman I loved was the one compiling it. That night, I drifted through my own house like an outsider, alert to every faint noise, every shifting shadow. When I heard Claire's key turn in the front door at 7:15, I was seated at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee and the newspaper spread open, doing my best to look at ease. "Hey honey," she called, her voice carrying the familiar warmth that once soothed me. Now it sounded rehearsed. "Hey, how'd the presentation go?" She stepped into the kitchen, placing her purse on the granite counter. She was still in her navy blazer, the one reserved for major meetings, and her blonde hair was neatly pulled back in the polished style she favored at work. "It went great, better than expected. We might secure the Morrison account." She leaned in and kissed my cheek. I had to steady myself not to pull away. "How about the laptop?" she asked casually. I lowered the paper and met her gaze. "Still in the shop. Dave said it may not be ready until tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" For a split second, something flickered across her face. Irritation, maybe concern, but it vanished quickly. Did he mention what was wrong? "Loose display cable. Nothing serious. It just takes time to fix right." Claire gave a small nod, though her fingers began tapping lightly against the countertop again. A subtle habit I was only now beginning to notice. That subtle tapping, her tell whenever something unsettled her. "I just hope he's handling my files carefully," she said. "I made that clear. He knows what he's doing." She offered a smile, but it stopped short of her eyes. "Good. I've got sensitive client material on there." I watched as she moved through the kitchen, preparing her usual herbal tea like she did every evening. On the surface, nothing had changed, but now I studied every movement, every inflection in her voice, hunting for cracks in the performance. The woman I was supposed to marry in 6 months suddenly felt like an actress playing the part of a devoted fiancé. "Patrick, are you all right? You seem somewhere else." "Just exhausted," I replied. "Long day at the site." That night, I lay awake beside her, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing, unable to stop wondering how many times she had stood over me with a camera while I slept. When the clock beside my bed glowed 2:47 a.m., I gave up on pretending and slipped quietly downstairs to my office. After shutting the door, I switched on the desk lamp and pulled the flash drive from my pocket. My fingers trembled as I connected it to my computer. A list of folders filled the screen, an organized archive of my life arranged like courtroom exhibits. For the next 3 hours, I reviewed everything piece by piece. There were images of bank records stretching back 8 months, captures of text exchanges with my attorney about revising my will, even snapshots of my daily planner outlining meetings and personal appointments. But the recordings unsettled me the most. Claire had been taping our conversations for months, saving every instance where I mentioned finances, property, or family history. I listened to myself talking about the trust my father created, the equity in our home, my long-term retirement plans. One file from 6 weeks earlier made my stomach tighten. I heard myself explaining my first marriage to Margaret and the settlement we reached when we divorced. She wanted half of everything, my recorded voice said, but the inheritance came after the divorce was finalized, so legally she couldn't touch it. Still, she's bitter about it. Claire's recorded response sounded gentle, supportive. That must have been hard. Do you think she's still angry about the money? Back then, I'd taken her curiosity as care. Now it felt deliberate, targeted questions designed to gather details. But for whose benefit? I shut the laptop and leaned back in my father's old desk chair, my eyes settling on the framed photo hanging on the wall, him and me on my college graduation day, both of us grinning with pride. He had been beaming with pride that afternoon, talking endlessly about the stability he was building for me through disciplined planning. I don't want you struggling the way I did when I was your age, he'd said. This inheritance isn't just money, it's options, it's freedom. And now that very legacy was being turned against me, twisted into something dangerous, and I still didn't know the reason behind it. The following morning, I called in sick and stayed home, dedicating the day to digging into private investigators operating around Denver. If Dave's suspicion was accurate and Claire had been hired, there had to be some trace licenses, affiliations, business listings. I combed through online databases, browsed agency websites, even made a few cautious calls posing as a potential client. Hours passed. Nothing linked her to any firm, no connections, no record. Just after noon, my phone buzzed. Margaret's name lit up the screen, and my stomach tightened instantly. We hadn't spoken in more than 2 years, not since she attempted to challenge my father's will in court. Patrick, I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time. Her voice carried that carefully measured calm she used whenever she had an agenda. Margaret, this is unexpected. I was hoping we could have a conversation. There are aspects of our divorce settlement I believe deserve another look. My grip tightened around the phone. That agreement was finalized 18 years ago. There's nothing left to revisit. Situations evolve, she replied coolly. I've consulted with an attorney, and there may have been inconsistencies in how certain assets were disclosed. A chill moved through me. What exactly are you implying? Your father's inheritance. There's concern it wasn't properly accounted for during the proceedings. I rose from my chair and paced toward the window. Margaret, the inheritance came 3 years after our divorce was finalized. You're fully aware of that. The trust itself was created while we were still married, she countered. My lawyer believes that introduces a legal gray area. Your lawyer is mistaken. There was a brief silence, and when she spoke again, her tone sharpened. We'll determine that soon enough. Let's just say I have access to far more detailed information about your finances now than I did back then. The call ended abruptly. I stood there staring at the silent phone, the pieces finally beginning to align in a way I didn't want to accept. I stood there holding the phone, thoughts colliding in my head. Margaret's call couldn't be random. She claimed to have new financial details about me at the exact same time someone had been meticulously archiving every corner of my financial life. Claire's questions replayed in my mind, her sudden fascination with my family background, the probing conversations about my first marriage, the careful way she'd asked about timelines and legal settlements. I had believed she wanted to understand me better. Now it felt like she had been collecting leverage for Margaret's next move in court. By mid-afternoon, I was back at TechFix. The bell above the door rang, and Dave immediately looked up, concerned about replacing his usual calm. Patrick, I didn't expect you again today. I need more details, I said. Yesterday you mentioned you'd seen something like this before. Tell me everything. He scanned the empty shop, then motioned for me to follow him to the rear workstation. The woman I told you about came in roughly 3 years ago, he began. Her boyfriend's computer had similar folders. Organized, thorough, methodical. She claimed she suspected him of cheating, but the surveillance went far beyond that. What happened after that? About a week later, the boyfriend showed up, said his girlfriend had taken his laptop for repairs. When I told him what the diagnostic software uncovered, we pieced it together. She'd been hired by his ex-wife to collect material for a custody modification hearing. A heavy weight settled in my chest. My fears were solidifying into something real. Did the ex-wife win? I asked quietly. Dave exhaled slowly. Partially. The information she gathered gave her some leverage, but once the court learned how it was obtained through deception and covert recording, the strategy backfired. The judge didn't look kindly on that kind of manipulation. I absorbed that carefully. If Margaret was behind this, she might think she was building a case, but if exposed, the scheme could collapse and take Claire down with it. Dave reached into a drawer and pulled out a small digital voice recorder. "Off the record, I probably shouldn't hand this to you," he said quietly. "But if someone's assembling a case against you, you need protection. Keep records. Save conversations. Build your own timeline." I turned the device over in my hand, feeling its surprising heaviness. "So you're suggesting I spy on the person spying on me?" "I'm saying you should be ready for whatever's coming," he replied firmly. "Defense starts with documentation." That evening, Claire came home at her usual hour, yet her energy felt subtly different. She hovered closer than normal, asking pointed questions about my day, my job site, even my weekend plans. The curiosity felt rehearsed, like someone overcompensating. "The laptop should be done tomorrow," I mentioned casually as we sat down to eat. "Dave called earlier." "Oh, that's good. I really need it back." She sliced her chicken with careful precision, then paused. "Patrick, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Have you ever considered what would happen to your dad's trust if something happened to you?" She hesitated. "Who would inherit it?" The question landed like a splash of freezing water. "Why would you ask that?" A faint blush crept into her cheeks. "I was just thinking, we're about to get married. Maybe we should talk more openly about long-term finances." I searched her face for cracks. "The trust becomes part of my estate. Since I don't have kids, it would be distributed according to my will. And your will leaves everything to me once we're married, right?" Hearing that out loud felt different now. Heavier. "Claire," I said carefully, "why the sudden interest?" She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean it to sound grim. I've just been thinking about our future. I want to understand what we're building together." I returned the gesture, forcing a steady smile. "We can sit down with my attorney before the wedding and go through everything in detail." "I'd like that." We finished dinner, but I couldn't ignore the way her eyes kept drifting to her phone. She seemed tense, waiting. When it finally vibrated against the counter, she quickly stood. "Excuse me, I need to take this." She disappeared into the bathroom with the phone in hand. I remained at the table, staring at the half-empty plates. The food tasted like paper. The house felt unfamiliar again, and the realization settled deeper than before. I was sharing my life with someone who was quietly working against me. Tomorrow, I would have to decide: confront her and risk detonating everything, or keep pretending while I uncover the truth. Either path felt like stepping blindly into the dark. But one truth was impossible to ignore now. Margaret's phone call was no coincidence, and Claire's sudden urge to keep tabs on me wasn't innocent curiosity either. Someone was carefully piecing together a case meant to trap me, and the woman I shared my bed with was secretly gathering the evidence that could destroy everything my father had spent years building in my name. The laptop sat on the kitchen counter like a patient hunter, silent yet threatening. Claire had collected it from TechFix earlier that day, thanking me repeatedly for handling the repair. A visible wave of relief crossed her face before she immediately buried herself in work, whispering about tight deadlines and lost time. I watched her closely, aware of the recorder Dave had tucked into my pocket, its cold edge pressing against my hip. "All good?" I asked, masking my nerves behind a relaxed tone. "Absolutely. Dave worked wonders," she said, closing the laptop with a bright smile. "I'll be staying late at the office tonight. A huge presentation in the morning." After she walked out, I stayed seated at the kitchen table, staring at the newspaper without absorbing a single word. Margaret's warning from the day before replayed endlessly in my thoughts. Her suggestion that someone had deeper access to my finances now felt ominous, especially with the growing realization that every corner of my financial world had been quietly documented. I made up my mind to ring my lawyer, Robert Chen, the man who had overseen my father's estate, and finalized my divorce from Margaret. If she was gearing up for a legal fight, he had to be alerted immediately. "Patrick, it's good to hear your voice," Robert greeted me warmly over the line. What's going on? I lowered my voice. I need to discuss something sensitive. Margaret called yesterday about reopening our divorce agreement. She hinted at issues with how assets were disclosed. Silence lingered for a beat. That's peculiar timing, he replied carefully. Why do you say that? He exhaled slowly. I got a call yesterday from a law firm based in Colorado Springs. They're representing an individual who claims to have uncovered new details about assets that supposedly weren't fully disclosed during your divorce. A cold wave settled in my stomach. Did they mention Margaret by name? No, he answered, but their questions were incredibly precise. He paused. They asked about when your father's trust was created and the exact structure of the inheritance you received. Details only someone with deep insider knowledge would think to question. My hand tightened around the phone. Robert, there's something you need to know. I believe my fiancée has been quietly collecting information on my finances for months. I have proof she's photographed documents and secretly recorded private conversations. Jesus, Patrick, are you absolutely certain? His tone sharpened. Without a doubt, I said firmly. What I don't know is whether she's coordinating with Margaret to come after the inheritance. Robert's voice turned grave. If that's the case, we don't have time to waste. I want you in my office this afternoon. Bring every piece of evidence you've got. 2 hours later, I was seated across from him in his downtown office, laying out the files Dave had extracted from Claire's laptop. Robert's face tightened with every page he reviewed and each audio clip he played. By the time he set the last file down, his expression had turned grim. This isn't random curiosity, he said at last. It's organized surveillance, and considering the timing of that Colorado Springs firm reaching out, this is obviously part of a calculated legal move against you. I shook my head, trying to process it. But Margaret's been broke for years. How could she possibly afford a private investigator? Robert eased back into his leather chair, fingers pressed together thoughtfully. There's something I never shared with you about the divorce, he admitted. Margaret approached multiple law firms back then, hoping to challenge your father's inheritance. Every single one refused her. The claim had no legal foundation. The trust was created after you separated, and the inheritance didn't come through until long after the divorce was finalized. Then why would anyone agree to represent her now? I asked. Because this time, Robert replied evenly, she may have leverage. Detailed records of your current holdings, documentation showing how the inheritance has been handled, insight into your lifestyle, your expenditures, your financial patterns. With the right narrative, an ambitious attorney could attempt to argue that the trust was always meant for you, potentially opening the door to a community property claim. A wave of nausea hit me. Even after 18 years of being divorced, it would be a stretch, he conceded. But family court has seen stranger arguments succeed, especially if they can suggest assets were hidden during the original proceedings. As the weight of that settled over me, Robert reached for a legal pad and started jotting down notes, his pen moving quickly across the page. We have to uncover the exact nature of Margaret's deal with your fiancé, Robert said firmly. Is Claire receiving money for the information she's supplying? Does she even hold a private investigator's license? And above all, what are they ultimately trying to accomplish? That night, I walked through the front door to find Claire at the stove, preparing dinner. She was making her signature chicken piccata, and the familiar aroma should have brought comfort. Instead, it felt staged, another carefully rehearsed act in the long deception she'd been carrying out. You're back sooner than I expected, she called, eyes still fixed on the pan. Weren't you meeting a client this afternoon? It got canceled. How did the presentation go? She smiled lightly. Really well. The Morrison account is practically secured. She turned toward me, and I caught sight of the faint shadows beneath her eyes. Patrick, are you all right? You've seemed distracted lately. I searched her expression for a crack, for guilt, for calculation, but all I saw was what looked like sincere concern. That made the betrayal cut even deeper. Just work pressure, I replied evenly. Nothing serious. We ate together, and for the first time in days, she seemed at ease. She chatted about coworkers, passed along bits of office gossip, and asked about my latest construction projects. It almost felt normal, if not for the recorder resting in my pocket and the awareness that anything I said could be preserved for someone else's advantage. "Claire, can I ask you something?" "Of course," she answered softly. "Have you ever crossed paths with my ex-wife, Margaret?" Her fork froze midway to her lips. "Margaret? No. Why would I ever have met her?" "Just wondering," I said lightly. "She rang me yesterday about the divorce settlement. Claimed she'd come across new details about my finances. That's odd, after all this time." I studied her closely. The surprise on her face looked real, but I no longer trusted my instincts when it came to her. "Yeah, odd," I agreed. "My attorney thinks she could be preparing some kind of legal move." Claire slowly placed her fork on the plate. "Is that even possible? It's been nearly 20 years since your divorce." "Unlikely she'd win," I admitted. "But people do reckless things when money's tight." "Is she having money problems?" she asked. There was something about the way she phrased it that felt deliberate, though I couldn't explain why. "As far as I know, she never remarried. She substitutes at a local school part-time. I doubt she has the funds for high-powered attorneys." Claire nodded, as if weighing that information. "Maybe she found someone willing to work on contingency. Maybe." Later, she headed upstairs for a bath, claiming she needed to unwind after the pressure of her presentation. I waited until the pipes groaned and the water began running before slipping quietly into the living room. My eyes settled on the small writing desk where she often sat with her laptop in the evenings. I didn't know exactly what I expected to uncover, but I needed proof, something tangible linking her to Margaret. I tugged at the desk drawers. Locked. That alone sent a chill through me. In 3 years of sharing a home, Claire had never locked away a single thing. I went out to the garage, retrieved a thin screwdriver from my toolbox, and returned to the desk. My hands trembled as I worked at the simple lock, feeling like an intruder in my own house. After several tense minutes, the mechanism gave way with a soft click. Inside the top drawer lay a manila folder. Across the front, written neatly in black ink, were 2 words: research notes. My pulse thundered in my ears as I lifted the flap. Inside were printed emails, pages of handwritten observations, and multiple business cards from law offices in Colorado Springs and Denver. But the letterhead on one particular document drained the color from my face. Margaret Holloway, consultation notes. The page was dated 3 weeks earlier. It outlined my daily movements, my work hours, even patterns in how I handled money. Beneath it sat another sheet labeled Asset Documentation Timeline, followed by a checklist of items to be photographed or recorded. Every single entry matched the material Dave had uncovered: bank statements, insurance policies, property deeds, recordings of private financial conversations. At the very bottom of the folder rested a business card from a firm called Henderson and Associates, family law specialists. On the back, in Claire's unmistakable handwriting, were the words "Consultation scheduled. Discuss community property arguments and concealment claims." My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and snapped photos of everything. It took several attempts to steady myself enough to capture clear images. When I finished, I returned each paper to its precise position, closed the folder, slid it back into place, and carefully locked the drawer. 20 minutes later, Claire came downstairs wrapped in her terrycloth robe, her damp hair twisted in a towel. I was on the couch, the television murmuring in the background, pretending nothing had changed. "Feeling better?" I asked evenly. "Much better." That bath was exactly what I needed. She settled beside me, curling into my side. "What are you watching?" "Just the news." She rested her head against my shoulder, and I had to suppress the urge to recoil. The woman I intended to marry, the one I had trusted with my deepest fears and private thoughts, was methodically plotting my financial ruin, and she was doing it so convincingly, playing the devoted fiancée so flawlessly, that a small desperate part of me still hoped there had to be some explanation. "Patrick? Yeah, I love you." The words struck like a punch to the chest. "I love you too." That would be the final lie I ever spoke to her. At dawn the next day, before Claire even stirred, I phoned Robert Chen. "I found the link," I whispered, keeping my voice low. "Claire's been meeting with Margaret. I uncovered consultation notes, scheduled appointments, everything." "Can you secure copies?" he asked immediately. "I already took photos," I replied. "But Robert, there's more. I think they're preparing to argue that my father's trust was created to conceal assets during the divorce. That's completely untrue. We both know that, I said. But if Claire's compiled enough records about my lifestyle and spending over the years, they could spin a story that I've been living off hidden marital property this entire time. He paused, the silence heavy. Patrick, you have to tread carefully. If they're constructing a case, they may try to provoke you into saying or doing something that validates their claims. Don't sign documents, avoid major financial moves, and do not discuss your assets with anyone. What about Claire? Carry on as usual until we know their exact strategy, but assume every word you say around her is being preserved. After we ended the call, I remained at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee growing cold in my hands. From where I sat, I could see through the upstairs doorway into our bedroom. Claire was still asleep, her face calm, almost angelic. Nothing about her appearance hinted at someone carefully engineering the collapse of my financial stability. But now the illusion was gone. The woman I had given my heart to was conspiring with my ex-wife to strip away the inheritance my father had left me. They had transformed my home into a covert operation, turning private conversations and shared moments into ammunition. The betrayal was absolute, and yet this was only the opening move. The offices of Henderson and Associates sat on the top floor of a sleek glass building in Colorado Springs, roughly an hour south of Denver. That morning, posing under a different name, I called claiming I needed family law representation and secured a consultation. I had to know precisely what kind of argument Margaret and Claire were preparing to use against me. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman with gentle eyes, guided me into a conference room with wide windows facing the mountains. "Mr. Henderson will join you shortly," she said, offering coffee. I declined. My nerves were already wound tight. 15 minutes later, James Henderson walked in. He was tall, in his 50s, carrying the quiet confidence of an attorney who had stacked up more wins than losses. He took the seat across from me and flipped open a legal pad. "So, Mr. Williams," he began, using the alias I'd provided, "you mentioned over the phone that this involves a complicated divorce matter and undisclosed assets." I had rehearsed the story carefully, close enough to the truth to draw real answers, but altered just enough to protect myself. "My ex-wife and I divorced nearly 20 years ago," I said. "She's recently learned that I benefited from a family trust that was technically created while we were still married. She claims she had no knowledge of it during the divorce." Henderson nodded, jotting notes. "And she believes she's entitled to a portion of those funds now?" "That's her position. The trust was arranged by my father, after we'd already separated. I didn't receive any distribution until years after the divorce was finalized. But on paper, the trust itself was formed during the marriage. And you had no awareness of it at the time?" "None. No access, no control, nothing until long after everything was settled." He leaned back, fingers pressed together thoughtfully. "That presents an interesting angle. Generally, property obtained after separation isn't divisible. However, if it can be argued that the trust was always intended for your benefit, and that its existence wasn't disclosed during the original proceedings, there may be a pathway to challenge the settlement." A knot formed in my stomach. "In Colorado," he continued evenly, "there are statutes addressing fraud or concealment in divorce cases. If sufficient evidence shows assets were hidden or misrepresented, a court could consider reopening the agreement, but it would require strong documentation, proof of concealment, and detailed records of how those funds have been managed since the divorce." "What kind of proof would that require?" I asked carefully. "Comprehensive financial documentation," Henderson replied without hesitation. "Records, evidence of lifestyle, indications that undisclosed assets supported a standard of living that couldn't have been maintained on reported income alone. Ideally, we'd need insider access to current financial data to construct a full picture." My stomach turned. That was exactly what Margaret and Claire had been assembling. And Henderson had just outlined their entire strategy step by step. "Has anyone ever managed to reopen a divorce after this many years?" I pressed. "It's uncommon," he admitted, "but it happens. Just last year, we reopened a 15-year-old case after an ex-wife proved her former husband concealed a trust valued at over $800,000. She walked away with a significant settlement." He leaned forward slightly. "It always comes down to documentation. If your ex has detailed knowledge of your assets and can establish a pattern suggesting concealment, she could have a credible argument. I thanked him, shook his hand, and left with no illusions about the danger ahead. Margaret and Claire weren't digging for leverage out of spite. They were constructing a legitimate legal assault that could drain me of hundreds of thousands. On the drive back to Denver, I called Robert Chen. "They're not bluffing," I said as soon as he answered. "I just met with Margaret's attorney. They intend to argue that my father's trust was a concealed marital asset, and they believe they've gathered enough to reopen the divorce." "On what grounds?" Robert asked sharply. 3 years of surveillance through Claire. They've documented my spending habits, my lifestyle, my current holdings. Henderson thinks the case could stand. Robert's tone hardened. "Then we move first. Come to my office this afternoon. Bring your father's original estate paperwork, every document related to the creation of that trust." 2 hours later, I was seated across from him again, watching as he carefully examined the original estate files my father had left behind. The leather portfolio that had once symbolized security now felt like an exhibit in my own defense case. "This is actually encouraging," Robert said at last, breaking the silence. "Your father documented everything with precision. Take a look at this." He slid a letter across the desk. It was written by my father to his estate attorney, dated 6 months after Margaret and I had separated, though before the divorce was officially finalized. In it, my father clearly stated that he was creating the trust specifically because of the divorce to ensure his assets would never be dragged into any marital property dispute. "He wasn't hiding anything," Robert said firmly. "He was shielding your inheritance from Margaret." "Will that stand up in court?" I asked. "It should," he replied. "Your father established the trust after the marriage had effectively ended in practice, even if the paperwork lagged behind. And there's more." He pulled out another document. "The trust terms prevented you from accessing the principal until you turned 40. Margaret can't credibly argue that you were secretly living off concealed assets when you didn't even have access to them for most of the years following your divorce." For the first time in days, I felt a spark of relief. "So their argument falls apart?" "Their legal footing is shaky," Robert admitted. "But weak cases can still inflict damage. Even if they lose, you could spend tens of thousands in legal fees, and there's always the risk of a judge who finds their narrative compelling enough to entertain it." He reached for a fresh legal pad and began writing again. "We need to shift strategies, document everything you've uncovered about Claire's surveillance, build a detailed timeline of her deception. Most importantly, we have to reveal their partnership before they position themselves as innocent victims seeking fairness." "How?" I asked. With caution, he answered. "We need undeniable proof that Margaret retained Claire specifically to collect evidence against you. If we can establish that Margaret orchestrated this operation, it destroys their credibility." That evening, I walked back into my house to find Claire in an unusually cheerful mood. She was humming softly as she prepared dinner, moving around the kitchen with an ease I hadn't seen in weeks. "Good day?" I asked, slipping my jacket into the hall closet. "The best," she replied, turning from the stove with a radiant smile. "The Morrison deal is officially ours, and my boss is hinting at a promotion." "That's great. Congratulations." Through dinner, she was almost bubbling with excitement, talking about her future at the marketing firm, raises, new responsibilities, bigger clients. Yet beneath all that enthusiasm, I sensed something deeper. Relief. Like a weight she'd been carrying had finally eased. "Claire, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you truly happy about our engagement?" "I mean, completely happy." The question caught her off guard. "Of course I am. Why would you even ask that?" "I don't know," I said carefully. "Sometimes it feels like you're keeping part of yourself guarded." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Patrick, I love you. I can't wait to marry you." But even as she spoke, her eyes darted toward her phone, which had been lighting up with messages all through dinner. "Popular tonight," I noted. "Just work things," she said lightly. "You know how it goes." After we finished eating, she stepped away, saying she needed to return a few calls about the promotion. The moment she disappeared upstairs, I retrieved the recording device Dave had given me and discreetly positioned it in the living room, right near the chair where she usually took private calls. About 20 minutes later, she came back down and sank into her favorite seat, phone already in hand. I moved into the kitchen, close enough to ensure the recorder would capture every word. "It's done," I heard her say. "The consultation went well today. Henderson believes we've got a solid case." Ice spread through my veins. She was discussing the legal meeting. "No, Patrick doesn't suspect a thing." The laptop repair had me nervous for a few days, but the technician didn't say he found anything suspicious. She paused, listening. "Margaret, I know this hasn't been easy for either of us, but we're close now. Henderson wants to submit the paperwork next week." "Margaret." She was speaking directly to my ex-wife. "I've copied everything," Claire continued. "Bank statements, property deeds, insurance files, even recordings of our private talks about money. Henderson says it's more than enough to establish concealment." Silence while Margaret responded. "The engagement ring alone appraises at $15,000. Add the renovations on the house and the vacations, and we can show he's been living far beyond what his reported income would allow." My stomach twisted. The ring I had chosen for her, the upgrades we made to our home, the trips I thought were memories we shared, they were now exhibits in a case built to prove I'd deceived my ex-wife. "I know this is uncomfortable," Claire went on softly, "but we're almost there. Once the settlement goes through, we can both move forward." Settlement. They were speaking about it as if it were inevitable. "No, I can't keep this up much longer. Living with him every day, acting like I'm in love. It's getting harder." She exhaled shakily. "But Henderson said we just need a few more weeks to wrap up the documentation." Each word felt like a blow to the chest. Harder to pretend. That's what our relationship had been to her. An act. Every moment I believed was genuine had been staged to collect evidence for Margaret's lawsuit. "I'll call you tomorrow after I copy the final bank statements," she added. "And Margaret, thank you. The payments you've been giving me have really helped with my student loans." Payments. Margaret had been funding this, paying Claire to move into my home, share my bed, accept my proposal, all while cataloging my life piece by piece for court. A chair scraped softly against the floor. The call ended. Moments later, Claire walked into the kitchen where I stood at the sink, pretending to scrub dishes, every muscle in my body locked in place. "Everything all right?" I asked, keeping my tone steady. "Perfect," she replied easily. "Just checking in with a colleague about tomorrow's projects." She brushed a quick kiss against my cheek and moved toward the stairs. "I'm exhausted. I think I'll turn in early." I waited until I heard the bedroom door shut before retrieving the recording device. The audio I'd just captured was unmistakable, clear, deliberate, devastating. Claire hadn't simply been feeding Margaret information. She'd been on her payroll. Our relationship hadn't been love. It had been a contract, a calculated arrangement designed to strip me of my inheritance. But now I had something powerful, proof, and the next move would be mine. For 3 sleepless nights, I prepared for what I knew would be the hardest confrontation of my life. Robert Chen helped me assemble everything. The recording of Claire's call with Margaret, the photos I'd taken from her locked drawer, the data Dave had extracted from her laptop. Together, it formed an airtight timeline showing she'd been recruited to spy on me. Still, evidence alone wasn't enough. I needed a confession, something undeniable that would shatter whatever legal strategy they thought they had. Robert had strongly advised against confronting her myself. "Let us handle it," he'd warned. "If you approach her, they could twist it into intimidation or harassment." But I couldn't keep living this lie. Each day under the same roof felt like another insult. Every night she lay beside me, while plotting to dismantle everything my father had left behind. The weight of that betrayal was suffocating. By Thursday evening, I'd made my choice. Claire was working late again. Another supposed client presentation. I used the empty house to my advantage, carefully placing recording devices in several rooms, ensuring that when the moment came, every word would be preserved. If she intended to keep recording my private words, I decided I would start recording hers. When Claire walked in at 8:30, I was seated at the kitchen table with a glass of wine and a thick folder filled with printed evidence. "Hey honey," she said lightly, dropping her purse near the door. "Sorry I'm late. The Morrison presentation has turned into a monster." "Claire, we need to talk." Something in my tone made her freeze. She studied my face before stepping fully into the room. "Is something wrong?" "Sit down." She hesitated. then took the chair across from me. Her eyes flicked to the folder, scanning the pages partially exposed on top. I know about Margaret, I said quietly. The color drained from her face, though her voice remained controlled. What about Margaret? I know she's been paying you. I know about Henderson and Associates, and I know about the surveillance you've been conducting for the last 8 months. Silence settled heavily between us. She didn't move, didn't blink, just sat there, as if mentally rehearsing her next line. Then she exhaled, the sound unsteady. Patrick, I can explain. I'm sure you can, I replied evenly. But first there's something you need to hear. I picked up my phone and pressed play. Her voice filled the kitchen. The recording from 2 nights earlier. Calm, clear, talking about how exhausting it was to live with me. How hard it had become to pretend she was in love. The composure she'd worn like armor, finally shattered. Oh God, she breathed, covering her face with both hands. Living with him every day, pretending to love him. It's getting harder, I repeated, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. Those were your exact words, Claire. She lifted her head, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. Patrick, please, just let me explain. It's not what you think. Then explain. Claire dragged a trembling hand across her face, fighting to steady herself. Margaret contacted me about 6 months before you and I met. She told me you'd concealed assets during the divorce, that she was entitled to part of your father's inheritance. She offered me $25,000 to get close to you, to document your finances. The ease with which she admitted she'd been paid to enter my life felt like another blow. And you said yes. I needed it, she whispered. My student loans were suffocating me. My salary barely kept me afloat. $25,000 felt like a way out. So everything between us started as a transaction. She shook her head desperately. In the beginning, yes, it was about the money. But Patrick, I fell in love with you. What we built, it became real to me. I searched her expression for honesty, for remorse, for anything solid. If you loved me, why keep collecting evidence? Why not tell Margaret you were done? Because I was afraid, she said, her voice cracking. Margaret warned me that if I walked away, she'd expose everything I'd already done. She'd tell you, destroy my career, maybe even press charges for invasion of privacy. So instead of facing that, you chose to keep lying to me? She reached across the table, fingers trembling toward mine, but I pulled my hand back. Patrick, I felt trapped. I tried so many times to figure out how to tell you, but I didn't know where to start. You could have started by not recording our private conversations about money, I said coldly. You could have stopped taking pictures of my personal documents. You could have told her no. You could have refused to help Margaret construct a case against me. I know, she sobbed. I know it was wrong, but by then I was already in too deep. Margaret had proof I'd been spying on you. She could have ruined everything, my career, my reputation, my life. I opened the folder and slid the copied consultation notes across the table. Then explain Henderson and Associates. Her eyes locked on the papers, and whatever color had returned to her face vanished again. How did you get those? That's irrelevant. What matters is that you and Margaret intend to file a motion next week claiming my father's trust was a hidden marital asset. Margaret intends to, she said quickly. I'm just supplying information. Information you obtained by deceiving me for nearly a year. My voice hardened. Do you even grasp what you've done? You turned our entire relationship into supporting material for a fraudulent lawsuit. She collapsed into tears, shoulders shaking. I never meant for it to spiral like this. I thought Margaret just wanted confirmation you were financially stable. I didn't realize she was preparing legal action until a few weeks ago. But you kept helping her. What was I supposed to do? She cried. She already had everything. Leaving wouldn't have undone it. I leaned back, exhaustion washing over me. A part of me still wanted to believe her feelings had been real, but facts outweighed emotion. Claire, listen carefully, I said. The case you've helped build rests on a lie. My father created that trust after Margaret and I separated, specifically to shield my inheritance from claims like this. His intent is documented in writing. Her head snapped up, eyes wide. What are you saying? She whispered. I'm saying Margaret's lawsuit is going to collapse. She won't see a single dollar of my inheritance. And once this surveillance scheme comes to light, She could face serious legal consequences. But Henderson said it was solid. Claire replied weakly. Henderson told Margaret exactly what she needed to hear, so she'd keep paying him. Any competent family lawyer would have explained her claim had no foundation. The realization spread across Claire's face like a slow-moving shadow. You're telling me this was all for nothing? I'm telling you that you destroyed us and broke multiple laws to help Margaret chase a case that was doomed from the start. Silence filled the kitchen. Her quiet sobs were the only sound while I sat there, trying to comprehend the scale of the damage she'd caused. What happens now? She finally asked. That depends on you. She looked up, confused. On me? How? I slid a document across the table, an affidavit Robert had drafted earlier that day. This is a sworn statement detailing everything you've admitted tonight about Margaret hiring you to spy on me. If you sign it, her case is finished before it even begins, and it protects me from any future claims. Claire read through the pages, her hands trembling. If I sign this, Margaret will know I turned on her. You already turned on her when you fell in love with me, I said quietly. And you turned on me when you kept helping her after that. Now you have to decide which betrayal you can live with. She swallowed hard. And if I don't sign, then I hand over every recording, every document, everything I've collected to the police. They can decide whether to pursue charges, privacy violations, illegal recordings, conspiracy to commit fraud. Margaret will still lose her lawsuit, but both of you could face criminal prosecution. Claire's eyes remained fixed on the affidavit for what felt like forever. If I sign, she asked softly, what happens to us? The question cut deeper than anything else she'd said. I could hear the sincerity in her voice, the regret. I believed that somewhere along the way her feelings had become real. But real feelings didn't erase calculated betrayal, and they didn't undo the damage she'd already set in motion. There is no us anymore, Claire. You ended that the moment you decided Margaret's threats mattered more than whatever love you claim you felt for me. She gave a slow, defeated nod, tears falling unchecked. I know. I destroyed it. With trembling fingers, she picked up the pen and signed the affidavit. As her name settled onto the page, a strange mix of emotions washed over me. Relief that I finally had what I needed to protect myself, and grief for the future I once believed we were building together. I'll pack tonight, she said softly. That's probably for the best. When she disappeared upstairs, I remained at the kitchen table, surrounded by folders, recordings, and printed proof of her deception. The house that had once felt warm and alive now felt sterile, like a scene where something precious had been quietly executed. Yet beneath the ache, there was something else rising. Freedom. The lies were over. The surveillance had stopped. The threat hanging over my inheritance was dismantled. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, consequences, fallout, but tonight marked the first step toward reclaiming my life. An hour later, she returned with 2 suitcases and a small box tucked against her chest. She paused at the front door, looking back at me through tear-filled eyes. Patrick, I really did love you. That part was real. I met her gaze, searching for any flicker of what we once had, but all I felt was a hollow calm. I know you believe that, I said evenly, but love doesn't secretly record someone's private conversations. It doesn't photograph their personal documents to use in court. Whatever you felt might have been sincere, but it wasn't love. She nodded faintly, accepting that there were no more arguments to make. I'm sorry, she whispered. After she walked out, I moved slowly through the house, switching off every recording device I had installed. One by one, the tiny red lights disappeared. The quiet that followed felt heavy, almost sacred. For the first time in months, there was no one monitoring me. No hidden agenda, no silent collection of evidence. I poured a glass of whiskey and sank into my father's old leather chair, the signed affidavit resting in my hand. That single document would dismantle Margaret's legal attack before it ever reached a courtroom. By morning, Robert would file the motions to permanently safeguard my inheritance. But that night wasn't about strategy. It was about stillness, sitting alone in my own home, beginning to mend from the deepest betrayal I had ever endured. 3 months after Claire walked out, I stood in Robert Chen's office watching him submit the final paperwork that would forever shield my inheritance from Margaret's fabricated claims. The affidavit Claire signed had shattered their case. Henderson and Associates withdrew as Margaret's counsel within days of receiving it, and no other firm was willing to take her on. "It's finished," Robert said, closing the file. "Margaret's petition has been dismissed with prejudice. She can never bring this claim again. The court also granted a restraining order preventing further harassment connected to your father's estate. A pressure I hadn't even realized I was carrying, finally lifted. For months, I'd lived under the constant shadow of losing everything my father had worked to leave me. Now that shadow is gone." "And the criminal case against Claire?" I asked quietly. "The district attorney declined to prosecute," Robert replied. "She cooperated fully, and it's clear Margaret orchestrated the scheme. They're treating Claire more as someone manipulated than as a primary conspirator." He paused. "She did face consequences. Her employer terminated her once the surveillance came to light." I nodded slowly. Despite everything, a part of me felt sympathy for her. She had made catastrophic decisions, but she had also been pulled into Margaret's desperation and false promises. And Margaret? Robert's expression hardened. "She's facing multiple charges: conspiracy to commit fraud, invasion of privacy, witness tampering. Henderson filed a complaint with the state bar as well, alleging she misrepresented facts to secure representation. She could be facing real jail time," Robert added, "along with heavy financial penalties." "She earned that," I replied evenly. He gave a small nod. "There's one more thing. Margaret has tried reaching you through my office several times. She claims she wants to apologize and possibly negotiate a settlement to avoid trial." I shook my head without hesitation. I don't want to hear a single word from her. She made her decisions 18 years ago when we divorced. Then she made them again when she hired Claire to infiltrate my life. I don't owe her forgiveness. And I'm not interested in negotiating anything. Robert smiled faintly. "I suspected you'd say that. I'll inform her counsel that all communication stops here." When I stepped out of his building and walked toward my car, something unfamiliar settled over me. Peace. Real peace. The constant tension, the feeling of being observed, measured, documented was gone. The fear that everything my father left me could vanish in a courtroom had dissolved. For the first time since this ordeal began, I could move forward without glancing over my shoulder. That night, I did something simple but meaningful. I invited friends over for dinner. Dave Rodriguez from TechFix and his wife Maria joined me on the back patio for steaks and a bottle of good bourbon. The sound of honest laughter filling the house again felt almost surreal. No hidden recorders, no ulterior motives, just conversation. After dinner, we sat around the fire pit, flames flickering against the cool night air. "How are you really holding up?" Dave asked quietly. "Everything you went through, it couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't," I admitted. "But in a strange way, maybe it had to happen. I learned things about myself, about trust, that I probably wouldn't have faced otherwise." Maria leaned forward, curiosity in her eyes. "Like what?" I watched the fire for a long moment before answering, the crackle of burning wood filling the silence. "I learned my instincts were stronger than I ever gave them credit for," I said finally. "Deep down, I sensed something wasn't right with Claire, long before I uncovered proof. I just doubted myself. I kept rationalizing things instead of listening to that voice. And now?" Maria asked gently. "Now I don't ignore that voice. I won't overlook red flags or excuse behavior that feels wrong just because I want something to work." Dave gave an approving nod. "That's a hard lesson, but a powerful one." "It was expensive," I admitted. "Emotionally, especially. But I'm actually grateful." They both looked at me, surprised. "I'm grateful I found out who she really was before I married her." Imagine discovering all of this 5 years into a marriage, or worse, after children. The betrayal would have been deeper, and the legal fallout, catastrophic. Maria tilted her head. "So you really see it as a blessing?" "I do," I said firmly. "My father left me that inheritance to give me stability and independence. If I'd married someone capable of that level of deception, I wouldn't have had security. I would have been trapped. A prison dressed up as a partnership." We stayed outside until the fire burned low. For the first time in months, the laughter felt unforced. The conversations were clean. No subtext, no hidden motives, no silent recordings waiting to be used in court. After they left, I walked through the house, switching off lights and arming the security system. Each room felt different now, lighter. The tension that had once clung to the walls was gone. What remained was something I hadn't felt in a long time: sanctuary. In the bedroom, I opened my nightstand and removed a small velvet box. Inside rested the engagement ring I had given Claire, a 2-carat sapphire framed by diamonds, a $15,000 promise of a future that no longer existed. She had left it behind the night she moved out, setting it quietly on the kitchen counter without explanation. The invitation caught me off guard, but not in the way surprises had felt these past few months. There was no tension behind it, no hidden motive, just warmth. I leaned back in my chair, looking out over the patio where the morning sun was settling across the stone. "I'd like that," I said, and I realized I meant it. "Coffee sounds great." Her relief was audible through the phone. "How about Saturday? There's a new place on Maple Street that just opened." "Saturday works," I replied. "Text me the details." After we hung up, I sat there for a moment, letting the conversation settle. 5 years ago, I hadn't been ready for someone like Sarah. I had been distracted, emotionally unavailable, still untangling old wounds from my divorce. Back then, timing, not compatibility, had been the problem. Now, for the first time in a long while, I felt steady. Later that afternoon, I drove to the jeweler and returned the ring. The transaction was simple and professional. No sentimentality, no second thoughts. When the funds cleared, I transferred the amount into my father's trust, exactly as I had promised myself. Closing that chapter didn't feel dramatic. It felt clean. Saturday arrived with clear skies and a calm I hadn't known in months. When I walked into the cafe and saw Sarah waiting near the window, I felt something surprising: ease. She stood to greet me, smiling the same warm smile I remembered. Genuine, unguarded. "It's really good to see you, Patrick." "It's good to see you too, Sarah." We ordered coffee and sat down, and conversation unfolded naturally. She told me about expanding her veterinary practice, about hiring 2 new associates and adopting an aging golden retriever that no one else had wanted. I told her in broad strokes that my engagement had ended, and that it had taught me some difficult but valuable lessons. She didn't pry. She didn't speculate. She simply listened. At one point she stirred her coffee thoughtfully and said, "You seem lighter." I smiled. "I am." And for the first time since everything had unraveled, I realized something important. Peace wasn't just the absence of betrayal, it was the presence of honesty, both from others and from myself. As we left the cafe and stepped into the afternoon sunlight, Sarah glanced at me. "I'm really glad I called," she said. "So am I." 3 months ago, my house had felt like a crime scene. My relationship had been evidence in a lawsuit. My future had felt uncertain. Now, standing on a quiet sidewalk with a woman whose intentions were simple and clear, I understood something my father had tried to teach me all along. Security isn't just about protecting your assets. It's about protecting your judgment, your boundaries, your peace. And this time, I intended to protect all 3. I'd love that. We agreed to meet next weekend at a small cafe in the heart of downtown. When the call ended, it struck me that for the first time since Claire walked out of my life, I was genuinely excited to see someone new. Someone without secret intentions, without hidden plans, without any ties to my past failures or my family's wealth. Later that day, I found myself driving to the cemetery where my father rests. It had been more than a year since my last visit. Part of the reason was work and wedding preparations that had consumed me, and part of it was the quiet guilt I carried, as if everything that had happened meant I hadn't truly honored him. His gravestone was modest and unadorned: Thomas Holloway, loving father and provider. I sat on the bench beside it and began telling him the whole story. Margaret's manipulation, Claire's betrayal, how dangerously close I had come to losing everything he had spent his life building for me. "But it's all right now, Dad," I said softly, only faintly aware of how strange it might seem to speak to stone. "The inheritance is secure. What you created is protected. And I finally understand what you meant when you said money gives you options. You gave me the power to walk away from anyone who saw me as nothing more than something to use." A light breeze stirred the branches above, and for the first time in months, I felt a deep sense of peace settle inside me. What my father truly left behind wasn't just financial stability. It was the independence to expect honesty and respect in my relationships. The confidence of knowing I don't require anyone's permission or backing to stand on my own. As I drove back home, I began outlining the changes I needed to make. I would guard my personal life more carefully. I would listen when my instincts warned me something wasn't right. I would choose sincerity over convenience in every connection I built. And above all, I would never again mistake loneliness for love, or confuse simple companionship with real partnership. That night, I prepared dinner for myself and ate quietly at my kitchen table, finishing a book that had been waiting for months. The stillness in the house felt whole and comforting. No one was secretly recording my words, because there was no one else there. No one was snapping pictures of my documents, because no one had access to the privacy of my home. For the first time in nearly a year, I felt entirely and undeniably free. Later that night, while getting ready for bed, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror and noticed something different. The man looking back at me was not the same man who had uncovered Claire's betrayal 3 months earlier. He was stronger. The pain had nearly broken me, but it had also taught me hard truths. I now had absolute clarity about what I would tolerate in a relationship and what I would never allow again. More importantly, I understood that my happiness was not dependent on being with someone else. My father's inheritance had secured my financial future, but the trials of the past year had given me something far more powerful: emotional freedom. As I switched off the lights and lay down in bed, gratitude washed over me for the first time since this nightmare began. I was thankful for Dave Rodriguez's integrity in bringing me the surveillance evidence, thankful for Robert Chen's skill and determination in safeguarding my inheritance, thankful for my father's wisdom in creating a trust that no one could successfully contest, and in a strange way, even thankful for Margaret's manipulation, because it exposed Claire's true nature before I made the irreversible mistake of marrying her. Tomorrow holds endless possibilities. Perhaps I would call Sarah and suggest turning our coffee into dinner. Perhaps I would finally book the European trip I had delayed for years. Or maybe I would simply savor another quiet, peaceful day in the home my father worked so hard to provide. Whatever the next day had in store, I would meet it as a free man, my integrity intact and my future secure. The nightmare had ended, and the rest of my life could finally begin. If this story resonated with you, let me know your thoughts below. And don't forget to subscribe to A Father's Wrath for more powerful stories about betrayal, strength, and redemption.